What better way to blaze down that rebel path than through art? Well, maybe there are better ways, I'm no expert, but one cannot deny the importance of art in politics and beyond. Art is expression, and even the simplest expression is depending on your perspective, political act. And this was no secret to the likes of Johnny Silverhand, the infamous frontman of the chromatic rock band Samurai. But Johnny wasn't the only cell in this musical brainchild. There was Kerry Eurodyne too, who is arguably more well-known than Johnny by 2077. But that's not all. One can't discuss the controversial, anti-establishment cultural movement of Samurai's heyday without discussing the stories of Denny, Henry, and Nancy as well, all equally important in Samurai's success. No whole is greater than the sum of its parts, after all. Heyo, it's Liddy, and welcome to Shaped by Stories with Bela in the background, where we unpack how characters shape stories, and how stories shape us. Let's get into it. The brainchild that would become Samurai hatched between two best friends, Kerry Eurodyne and Johnny Silverhand. After Johnny's time in war, he wanted to wake the world up, stir up a fire of revolution and change against killing in that corpo name. Kerry Eurodyne saw, through his own experience growing up as a lower-class citizen, a powerful meaning and passion to inspire his music, one of the few things that he could call his own in this barren, late-stage capitalist world. Expression is you, it's yours. It's one of the few things a person can lay claim to as theirs in a world like Cyberpunk's and like ours. For Johnny and Kerry, it wasn't just about money, like their art actually meant something very deep to both of them, even if the meaning was a bit different. And I think it's pretty fair to say that Denny, Henry, and especially Nancy Hartley, Samurai's other band members, all felt very strongly along very similar lines to Kerry and Johnny. While Samurai's first gig at the Red Dirt isn't exactly dated, Samurai was certainly playing under that name by 2003, as this is when they were approached by an intoxicated Jack Masters at the Rainbow Cadenza Club, a grungy but popular venue with the local cyberpunk scene. And Jack Masters was none other than the head of Universal Music. While there's some back and forth references as to Samurai's level of popularity, they're kind of conflicting. Some people say that they were never really that successful, but then other people will say that they were huge. At the very least, Samurai was a big deal to a certain underground crowd. And this underground crowd wasn't necessarily a small one, but it was definitely a crowd that corporations wanted to bury as deep as they could. Samurai is said to have sold out Wembley Stadium on their first world tour. Kerry says in the Rocker Boy sourcebooks that they played a show for 100,000 people. Like, that's a pretty big deal. Samurai's music spoke to the disenfranchised, the everyday person just trying to survive. To the angry youth of the early 2000s, enraged at the hopeless world whose only choice was what logo you would spend your life slaving away for, Samurai served as a rallying point. And while I'm sure there's a lot of things that go into transforming a common rabble into an actual threat, or an instrument of change, being united is definitely a major part of it. But Samurai wouldn't make it to the 2010s. They ultimately broke up in 2008, after world tours, 6 albums, and one of the most successful debuts of all time, at least according to the wiki. Dino Dinovich, a rocker boy fixer that we can meet in 2077, recalls one of Samurai's gigs back in their prime, where Johnny had a corpo executive tied up for torture in the back. If the applause wasn't loud enough, he would go back and torture the corpo a little more. Maybe that's an exaggeration from an already sketchy fixer, but the band did become a little more concerned about Johnny's increasingly radical activism, especially Kerry Eurodyne. As Kerry says in the Rocker Boy sourcebook, the more famous a person was, the more they had to be very, very careful with their words. And Johnny, as I'm sure many of us know, is Johnny. For Johnny, the message of the band was always the most important, whereas for Kerry, it was about the music. Kerry wasn't as bold or as reckless as Johnny was becoming, and the two began to butt heads more and more. Kerry had tried to leave the band numerous times over the years, only to be convinced to stay, but when Johnny had finally had enough in 2008, for reasons I will explain shortly, Samurai as a whole called it quits. The band members had all grown apart anyway, and they'd begun heading in new directions creatively. But who are these other band members? Not Kerry and Johnny, they both need their own videos, there's a lot to cover for them. No, the people that I want to talk about today are Denny Henry and Nancy Hartley, or as we know her, Bes Isis. When it comes to Denny, Samurai's drummer, we unfortunately don't know much about her past. But what we can find out shows that this lady worked hard for her success, and she did not put up with bullshit either. According to the Rocker Boy sourcebook for the Cyberpunk tabletop, at the Rainbow Cadenza, Denny was ready to defend the band from their future agent with a chair that she just picked up because she thought he was just a random high guy harassing the band. And yes, indeed, Jack Masters was high as a kite, but he really was Jack Masters, the head of Universal Music. After Samurai's breakup in 2008, Denny found success with the band Mastermind. Some sources say that Mastermind was founded by Denny, some say she was just a member. Either way, Mastermind was signed to the DSM music label. Now, according to the Rocker Boy sourcebook for the tabletop, Kerry says that he and Johnny had some beef with DSM, but he still said he would publicly support Denny's work with DSM so long as they treated Denny better than they treated Kerry and Johnny. And it seems that DSM did indeed treat Denny relatively well. While we don't know the extent of Denny's musical career and all the things that she's done, by 2077 she is wealthy enough to have a mansion in North Oak, to have a gold-plated baseball bat, and also, she looks as good as Kerry does, if not better, considering she's probably in her late 80s. De-aging tech is not cheap. Keep in mind, Kerry is 89. Denny could be older for all we know. Denny did sort of grow apart from her old bandmates over time, life goes on as they say, but she did remain closest to Samurai's bassist, Henry, who at one point in their youth she was in a relationship with. From what I could find, this relationship was a long time ago. I'm guessing sometime in the 2010s is when it occurred, as it's said in lore that they were a unit after the breakup of Samurai, but it doesn't seem like they built much of a life together. I'm not sure, but Denny and Henry still had a soft spot for each other well after their likely breakup. Enough that Denny actually tried to help a struggling Henry sometime before 2077. I personally don't think that Denny and Henry were a couple at the time that the following incident occurred, just from the way that Denny talks about Henry and about this incident, but the two were definitely the closest of all the remaining Samurai members. Henry was dealing with addiction, something he struggled with for decades prior to 2077, likely since his Samurai days. He was struggling to find work, both in music and outside music. Denny found a band in need of a bassist, and she helped Henry manage his addiction to the point that he was able to stop using, which is a lot more than most people might do for an old friend. But Henry then cut Denny out of his life as he threw himself into his new one, and Denny was deeply hurt by that. Again, I'm not sure if they were romantically linked at this point or not. Even as friends, this would have sucked, and I can't imagine how horrible that would be if they were together and then Henry just left Denny like that. Sure, you can argue that Denny helping Henry back into circumstances associated with his past addiction wasn't the greatest decision. I think that's a thing they highlight in how you can help somebody not relapse by keeping them away from circumstances and situations that are associated with former drug use. But on the other hand, speaking as someone who comes from a family with some substance abuse issues, I sort of also see it as Considering how Henry was in a really difficult place with limited options and he may have already burned a lot of bridges, music may have been the only feasible way for him to make a living at this point. Sure, would rehab have been better for Henry? Yes, but only if he wanted to go. You can't force someone into rehab. It'll usually backfire really bad. Henry, unfortunately but not surprisingly, started partying with his new band, to the point that he started using again. And it only took 1 month, just 1 month, for his new band to get sick of his behavior and to kick him out. He managed to find Denny one day on the streets of Night City, and he fell to his knees, begging her to help him. But Denny was done with Henry at this point. I can't blame her. She was deeply hurt by how Henry just cut her out of his life until he needed something again, and she left him in the street. Addiction is a hell of a thing, and it makes people do shitty things that they might not have done if they were otherwise in good health. But Denny is also not obligated to forgive and forget. Who knows how many other times she had already forgiven and forgotten. Denny hid her future address from Henry, and she never contacted him again from what we know. At least, until Kerry busted Henry out of rehab in 2077. Kerry gave Henry Denny's address, unaware of the history between the two. And the first thing Henry does is commandeer a cement truck and pour concrete in Denny's pool, which Denny is not happy about. Kerry and V have to calm things down between the two exes, but there's no way we can heal the rift that has formed between the two. You have to choose between Denny or Henry for the samurai reunion, because Denny refuses to play with Henry. If he hadn't dumped cement in the pool, maybe she would have tolerated him. But Kerry should not have broken that guy out of rehab. Oh, Kerry. Denny is never involved in the plot of 2077 again, but we can find a mention of her in People of Night City, CDPR's in-universe interviews meant to serve as a sort of promo for 2077. In Denny's interview, she expresses frustration with the media, saying that it's crazy that modern reporters and journalists would rather be interviewing her, a drummer from a long-dead band, than talk about the real hard-hitting stuff going on in the world, like the increasing horrors of climate change, the wealth gap, the crimes of megacorporations. She's still got a bit of that samurai rebel in her, even after all these years of celebrity and riches, which, some might argue that makes her a bit of a hypocrite. Some might argue that that's just the way the system is, and if you can profit off it, then why not? Either way, Denny is irritated that journalists would rather hear all about Henry dumping cement into her pool than actually trying to touch on hard-hitting issues. Which, yeah, you can't blame her for being annoyed for that. Oh, Henry. Henry was Samurai's bass guitarist, but according to Johnny, Henry was always a bit of an idiot. He was a party animal, kind of the stereotypical rock star party boy, but he played with Samurai for as long as they were together. People put up with his antics. It was just Henry. At least until their breakup in 2008. Sometime after the breakup, Henry was in a relationship with Denny. But also around this time, Henry suffered a horrific workplace injury while working on a human interface project with a company called Blaze Tech. Which, I gotta say, it's kind of cool to picture Henry, the idiot of the band as Johnny describes him, maybe being like an idiot savant, like he's absolutely nuts in some ways, but maybe he was a technical genius. I don't know. Maybe if Henry hadn't gotten his brain fried, he could have been like a famous techie or something. Maybe he would have become a corpo, which would have kind of been hilarious. Henry took a long time to recover from this incident, as his memories were all jumbled, and apparently a lot of his basic motor functions were temporarily compromised. It says in the sourcebook that Henry's brain was, literally, rewired by the damage, and this stopped him from playing bass, at least for a while. Sometime after would be when Henry began to have severe substance abuse issues well beyond his previous party lifestyle. Trust me, I'm not a doctor, but I'm reminded of post-concussion syndrome or traumatic brain injury and the wide array of brain injuries that can fundamentally change a person to someone they might never have been otherwise. This area of Henry's character kinda hits close to home for me, as an extended family member of mine was posthumously believed to have suffered from some variety of TBI or something of the like, only for it to go completely unrecognized for his entire life, as he suffered not one, but 2 freight truck accidents in his youth. Yes, he got hit by 2 fucking freighters in 2 separate incidents in the 1970s and 80s. Which, fast forward to the updated medical science of the 2010s, was believed to have very likely damaged his brain long term. We'll never know for sure, but it's a possibility that, had it been known back then when these accidents happened, had it been entertained by his doctors, maybe that knowledge could have helped him live a healthier life, but of course medicine was not where it is today. Like, could this person still function like a normal person? 100%. If you'd met him on a surface level, he seemed pretty normal. But he developed immense substance abuse issues not long after, as well as aggression that was not characteristic of him prior to the accidents. Certainly these 2 things could be caused by a wide variety of things, but you know, it's a thing that we always wonder. This family member I'm talking about died relatively young from substance abuse. Obviously in Henry's case, like, Henry's brain got fried by electricity during a terrible cyberware interface accident. It's a little different from getting smoked by 2 freighters. But when I look at Henry's story, I'm just reminded of this family member, and yeah, it's a horrible situation. I can't help but wonder, both for Henry and for this family member, how different life could have been if more had been done or more had been known about this kind of injury at the time that they lived through it. You just wonder how different life could have turned out if that injury had never happened. At some point, anyway, Henry did approach Denny for help. It sounds like her life was going a lot better than his was in many ways, and she did help him get clean. She even hooked him up with a new band. Unfortunately, this was not the best environment for a recovering addict at a high risk of relapse, and relapse Henry did. Henry started partying again, he started using again, and he cut Denny out of his life completely. At least, for the whole month he was with this band, before they kicked him out for his behavior. Henry then found Denny on the street one day, and he begged her to help him. But Henry had hurt Denny, and she cut all ties with him. We don't know all of what Henry's been up to in the time period leading up to 2077, but Kerry Uridine found him in rehab. So he's clearly been struggling with his addictions, at least on and off, for quite some time. Kerry busts him out so Henry can join for the samurai reunion, and I kinda wonder if Henry was put in there by someone else. Maybe he did check himself in, but Kerry, why did you have to break him out of rehab? If your friend is in rehab, he's probably got some deep shit he's working through. And indeed, it was a bad call to break him out, because the first thing he does, once Kerry blabs about Denny's address, because Kerry's not aware, he's not thinking about this, is dump a cement truck of concrete into Denny's pool. If you take Johnny's word for it, Henry has always been like this, even before his accident, at least to a degree. He's like, yeah, he'll do what he wants, but he doesn't like to deal or accept the consequences of his action. Denny refuses to play with Henry, though Henry is totally okay with playing with Denny. But he doesn't quite get why Denny is so against playing with him, at least on the surface. Maybe deeper than that, he might understand. It just makes me sad, because Henry clearly needs a lot of help, but he also clearly misses those better days with Samurai. Henry is actually very clearly happier and more excited to be playing with Samurai again, should you choose him over Denny. And it's nice to see, but then you remember that Henry probably hasn't had a lot of wins in recent years. This is a big deal for him. Every other Samurai member has, in their own respective career paths, had a lot of success. Even Johnny had a lot of success before his death. For Henry, it's just been downhill since the 2010s. It's probably been a painful decline for him, and he just keeps digging this hole deeper and deeper. If you choose to side with Denny, You can find Henry sulking on the sidewalk outside her mansion. And like, yeah, he's a shithead, but it's so hard not to feel kind of bad for him, even in regards to Denny, because Denny seemed to be the one person who cared about him most, and he kind of screwed the pooch on that. I think he knows it, and I just feel bad for him. But Henry, oh Henry, I hope he goes back to rehab. Damn it, Kerry. Nancy Hartley, or as V knows her, Bes Isis, was Samurai's keyboardist. Before getting into music though, Nancy was a member of a booster gang. So, like, Nancy's definitely no stranger to some heavy shit. She's no delicate flower. For those who might not know, an example of a booster gang is Maelstrom, which explains Bes Isis's level of ease around Maelstrom by time V meets her. Nancy joined Samurai, as she says in her People of Night City interview, because she saw no future. The world was hopeless, especially for the youth. She saw music as her way of pushing back. In that sense, she is not unlike Johnny or Kerry. Nancy was also, at least according to Baby Johnny, a bit of a control freak. She liked to be in charge, and she really took over the management of Samurai as much as she could. But this wasn't all bad. Nancy booked gigs, she thought of all the logistics, she would handle some of the finances. Nancy handled shit. She's also the one who named the band Samurai, reasoning, in an ironic sense, that a samurai, like Johnny, was willing to die for their beliefs. Something she kind of thought was stupid. But Johnny and Kerry didn't care about the irony she packed behind the name, they just liked how it sounded. Nancy played with Samurai consistently until about 2007. Around this point is when she married a man who would turn out to be abusive. Nancy hid the truth of the abuse for quite some time. One day, in 2007, Nancy told her bandmates the truth, and that her husband wanted her to quit the band. Johnny and Kerry set aside their own increasing differences, and they headed over to Nancy's apartment to deal with this clown. But it turns out Nancy didn't need their help. Nancy was, after all, a former member of a booster gang. At this point, her husband's attempt at removing her ability to express herself through music was the final straw. She was like, no. Nancy's husband started beating her again, and she decided enough was enough. She went and defended herself. According to the Rocker Boy sourcebook, not only did Nancy push her husband out of the window of their 83rd story penthouse, but she'd apparently done a number on him before that. Once again, Nancy handled shit. But the law didn't quite see it that way. Nancy was arrested and convicted and sentenced to 7 months in jail. Even though her sentence was only a matter of months, the band fell apart without her. One could argue that it was bound to happen anyway, but Nancy, even if she might have been teased for being a control freak, was also kind of the glue that kept Samurai together. She handled all the overhead stuff, which left the rest of the band to their own devices. Tensions flared in her absence, especially between Johnny and Kerry. Nancy was ready to rejoin once her sentence was up, but the damage was done. Samurai broke up in 2008. But this didn't stop Nancy from living her life as a newly single lady who just drop-kicked 200 pounds off a balcony. Nancy got a fresh start, or as fresh as she possibly could. She changed her career from rocker girl to media, and she changed her name from Nancy Hartley to Bes Isis. Nancy also has another pen name, but Bes Isis is usually the one that she uses. Nancy, as I touched on earlier, does seem to have a more philosophical, thoughtful way of looking at words, a little more poetic-ish. She's an investigative journalist and writer, after all. But I also find her chosen names to be sort of ironic as well. So, Bes is an Egyptian god. I mean, maybe it's short for Bessie.
Bessie. She was one of yours.
Bessie. Thank the gods for Bessie. And
but I think it's to do with the Egyptian god in this case. Anyway, Bes is a god of protection, of fertility, and apparently was a paragon of the good and an enemy of all things bad. Bes Isis is definitely one of the, at least by the sounds of it, one of the last heavy-duty investigative reporters in the world of cyberpunk. She's ready to dig into a dangerous situation to get to the source. But you could also see the name Bes sort of ironically with Bes Isis. Like, Bes Isis strikes me as like less of a protector of the good and more of a destroyer of the bad. She kind of strikes me as most like Johnny of all the samurai band members. Like, sure, you could view the destroying of evil as a protecting action towards the good indirectly, but guess it depends on your viewpoint. But one of the things that separated Bes Isis from Johnny and their pursuit of change is that Bes Isis didn't see the need to die to prove her point. She says in her People of Night City interview that arts and journalism aren't that different. She's still fighting her war with the bleak reality she lives in. She's just expressing herself with the pen rather than the sword. I mean, like, Bes Isis got to live to see just how well the sword worked out for Johnny. The Isis part of her name is also very packed with meaning. Again, Isis as a goddess is a protective figure, but she's associated with motherhood, also with resurrection. She's associated with fate, of having power over people's lives. And you could definitely argue that as a media, Bes Isis can ruin some people's lives, should she uncover their dirty secrets. She also says that she's been known to resurrect the name of Johnny Silverhand and Samurai when her stories are running dry. But the motherhood part, well, Nancy's son, Dan, has some issues with his mom. We can meet him during one of Rogue's gigs, where he gambled his car away, along with some special samurai bootleg recordings that are worth a lot of money. Dan has a gambling addiction, he's high on something when V meets him. He almost kind of reminds me of Henry. Henry's the father theory ensues. I say that jokingly, but it's not necessarily true that Dan is the son of Nancy and her first husband. It's never specified when he was born, etc., etc. I don't know. There's some in-universe stuff that says everybody in Samurai was sleeping with each other anyway. Which, you know, could just be rumors, but I just find that possibility quite funny. Either way, Dan doesn't have any warm things to say about his mom. The two are definitely estranged. He's high, sure, but it feels like when you ask him about his relationship with his mother in Rogue's gig, he never really saw Bes Isis as a very loving figure. He says he doesn't even call her mom. He doesn't call her mother. He doesn't call her any of that. Sure, yes, adults make their own decisions, and you can't necessarily put that on their parents. Like, sometimes good people have kids that grow up to make not great decisions. It does happen. But I don't know. It's just ironic that someone who chose the name Isis, a goddess of motherhood, has such a strained relationship with her son. But alas, we don't know much else. In 2077, Bes Isis is now working for N54 News. She's a famous journalist at this point in her life, likely in her 80s, and she was even nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for a piece she did on 600,000 nomads who were all trapped in South America, who had to walk 3,000 miles to escape corporate imprisonment, sort of. She even participated in this walk at one point. So Nancy's always been covering anti-corporate subjects, going where few other medias dared to go. She's kind of like Thompson in that sense. Another thing that Nancy did, she replaced her chest and some limbs with cybernetic implants in order to do a story on meat jumping. And meat jumping is when medical corporations like Trauma Team steal injured clients from one another mid-rescue. Nancy basically damaged herself in order to register as injured, from what I understand, so she could be an eyewitness to this life-threatening business practice. In a business that already thrives on emergency urgency, Nancy is hardcore. And she hasn't stopped being hardcore, even as a senior citizen. V is asked by Kerry to track Bes Isis down for Samurai's reunion concert. And we find her, after being told that she's been missing for a few days by a cranky assistant, in the Totentanz, the nightclub owned by Maelstrom. So basically, Bes is doing a piece on the music that Maelstrom listens to, specifically music by the DJ Tinnitus, because Tinnitus's music doesn't sound to most people the same way it does to people in Maelstrom. There's all kinds of theories about how this music works. And there's still some theories that this has to do with the techno-necromancers of Alpha Centauri. But the jury is still out on that. Apparently there's a cocktail that the Maelstromers there tell you to drink to experience the music the way they do, but that's another layer to the Mr. Blue Eyes conspiracy, and now I have to cover Maelstrom. See you in the next video. Anyway, Bes can usually handle herself, but in the case that Patricia is in charge of Maelstrom, V arrives just in time to save her. Patricia thinks she's a spy, and Bes has basically been kept in a back room, the shit kicked out of her for the last few days. If Royce is in charge, even though he's not as aggressive as Patricia, he's still kind of a bit of a danger for Bes to be around. He does sit at his booth with her and talk to her about the music, and says the music has to do with cochlear implants and all that, but he's mostly just annoyed with her questions, and I don't think Bes gets all the information she wants out of Royce. But if Brick is still in charge of Maelstrom, we find Bes sitting in his booth with the Maelstrom leader, having a civil, relatively reasonable discussion. Yes, Brick is annoyed, but he's pretty nice insofar as Maelstrom goes. I think she gets more out of Brick than any other Maelstrom leader. Again, Nancy is no stranger to booster gang politics. She likely knew what she was walking into heading into the Totentanz. And I think, well, Patricia and Royce are both abrasive and they don't care about Bes Isis's history. I think Brick is far more likely to respect her origins as well as her work. I also just think Brick is more reasonable and stable in general when it comes to Maelstrom. Bes Isis doesn't take much convincing to join up for the reunion concert. I think she's quite pleased at the idea of playing her keyboard again. She even plans the whole gig at the Red Dirt, a callback to the old days. Bes is also the one who gifts V Johnny's guitar. To this day, she still gets shit done. After the concert, we can help Bes Isis again with the Killing in the Name quest. Rage Against the Machine, which, you know, I mean, Rage Against the Machine is very much like Samurai in a lot of ways. In this quest, we track down the source of all the weird Bartmoss Collective messages to this modded fortune teller machine in Pacifica. Somebody connected it to the net and made it spew all these cryptic messages. And this actually helps Bes earn a Pulitzer Prize, cracking these mysterious messages and discovering that they're all just a joke. A common bug occurs though, where the Pulitzer Prize win text can actually be received by V before they even complete the quest associated with it, which happened to me. So I thought when I got this text, oh, the Maelstrom deal won her the prize? No, apparently that is a bug. It's the fortune teller machine. Honestly though, I would have loved it if it was for Maelstrom's unique music. If any journalist could uncover the blue-eyed conspiracy, I think it would be Bes Isis. And yeah, I guess I know what my next big video is now. I don't have an outro anymore for this video. It's just another video where I go, yeah, the Mr. Blue Eyes video is delayed yet again for another week. Thank you so much for watching. This was fun. I went into some source books again for the tabletop, and it was really cool to find out more about Denny Henry and Nancy, particularly Nancy Bes Isis. I just find her to be really interesting. She reminds me of like a Johnny, but if Johnny was less, like, violent. I don't know. And also a woman. Also, some of you might remember that I said I was going to advertise my book more this year. Well, here I am again with a well overdue advertisement of my debut novel, Kaisaria Book 1. It is my first novel ever. You can get it on Amazon right now in ebook or paperback or hardcover format. Genuinely, every copy helps keep the channel alive. And also, speaking of what keeps the channel alive, members, thank you so much. Members, it means a lot to have your support. I have no desire to become a corpo oligarch, so I rarely, if ever, take any kind of sponsor, and even then I would only take Canadian ones, because I like to support Canadian businesses, especially with everything going on in the world right now. Members, you genuinely are making a huge difference in keeping this channel functioning, so thank you very much. Channel members get early access to all my videos as soon as they are posted on YouTube, so you don't have to wait to watch them. Just once they're uploaded, you're good to go. And also members get dog pics, so you know, there's that. And I don't mean my feet. I don't mean my feet, no. I meant like, the only feet you're gonna get on the members post channel is only Pepper's paws. Only paws. Thank you so much for watching, for liking, for commenting, subscribing if you do. Like, it means a lot. It helps the channel. Thank you very much, guys. And I will see you again in the next one. Goodbye!